So,
Oh.
alright, here we begin. This is my biography of my father. So, I know this guy, or did. It's called One Little Bolshevik. When I was 7, I sat on one end of a big brown leather couch in our home library, watching my father ingest a fish. As I fingered the buttons of the couch, my father tore into the fish, cooked and cold from the grocery deli counter with his bare hands. He stuck his teeth into the belly, ripping it apart. He chewed it down to the core, spitting bones to the side of the plate. Nothing was wasted. I was horrified and intrigued. I wondered, how did he come to eat like this? He turned to me and smiled, chewing, fish oils glistening on his gray mustache. Other fathers in our well-to-do town of Sudbury, Massachusetts used utensils. They had fine manners. They didn't hunch over their food and come back up only when their food was gone. As I grew older, I heard my father's stories of his childhood in Belarus. He'd lost his family in World War II and was adopted by Nazis. So, whose father wasn't? It seemed normal to hear of my father nearly starving on the streets before he was given a job in a German-occupied slaughterhouse in Minsk, Belarus. And I thought every dad had experienced what he had. As I grew older, I started to realize that my dad's life had been unusual. In 1999, I sat down with my dad in his winter condo in Sarasota, Florida, pressed a button on a tape recorder and said, "Start at the beginning. Tell me your name and take it from there." He peeked at me over the top of his bifocals, stared for a moment before he rolled his eyes. I was born Vladimir Alexandrovich Prokowiew, Volodya to my friends, Vova to my family, he said with his pipe still held on his tongue and lower lip. 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, for a month, he told me his stories. I constantly stopped to ask him questions. He wanted to tell me the stories as he'd grown accustomed to telling them, but I wanted to dig deeper. He clicked his tongue and shook his scowling face when I interrupted. He stood and paced the floor. He fixed a cup of coffee with a little cream and 2 sugars. I waited. I watched a bird drift across the pond in back of the condo, but I didn't get off the couch. The tapes rolled and now reveal long stretches of quiet interrupted by the clink of his pipe against an ashtray, the striking of a match. He took moments to load his pipe with new amphora tobacco and light it before he continued. He might have been trying to wear me out. After a week of moving forward in his story, I asked him to go back to the first moments he experienced Nazi Germany's invasion of Belarus. What was it like when he was 10 years old and a Luftwaffe plane shot at him? How did it feel to come home to Minsk from summer camp and find his family was gone, his apartment burned down, and to be alone in a city freshly crawling with war? "Why do you keep asking me about the first day? The next day was just as good," he said, raising his voice to gruff, irritated levels no different than those he used to tell me I'd overloaded the washing machine. "As soon as you see your city almost gone, there is a knot in your stomach. You have that sinking feeling. This just gets worse as you approach your burned-out building. You are hopeful, you are hopeful, you are hopeful, and little by little, that last hope is gone too." After I shut off the tape recorder for that day and sat with my mom watching the local news, my father sat behind us at the dining table. He clinked the ashtray with his pipe. "Don't you feel bad for me? Don't you?" he asked. When I turned to look at him, his face was scrunched up, his eyes pinched nearly closed and filled with tears. I stood up, walked behind him, hugged his neck, and kissed his near-bald head. "Of course I do, Papa. Of course I do." That night, neither he nor I could sleep. We paced the apartment together, and he told me he was having nightmares. I confessed I was having my own, which consisted of blurred visions of the stories my father and I had put on tape. Always in these dreams, my father appeared as the pudgy-faced, blonde 10-year-old that I'd seen in pictures, the same face seen in pictures of my brothers and me at that age. In my nightmares, he'd been running, ducking, as planes close enough to touch ripped through the sky, pouring down bullets around him. My father looked out the condo window at the moon. It lit up the water of the pond. "You damn kid. You're stirring it all up for me," he muttered. I continued to stir. In a month of recording, we began something, and then I needed to go back to college. My father saw me off at the airport, and when he hugged and kissed me goodbye, he told me he'd miss me. I didn't ask, but I'd grown comfortable with the assumption that he'd miss our interviews most of all. When I returned to college, I put away the tapes. I told my Russian politics professor about my time in Florida. He wanted to hear more of my father's story and asked me to tell them to his classes. It seemed that I'd been telling the story since I was 7, in increasing detail, always to people who took to the idea of a Belarusian boy adopted by Nazis. My father, I found, had lived through interesting, captivating circumstances, and I saw opportunity to capture a piece of my family history, write something that would keep me engaged as a writer and researcher, and give my father a means to keep his stories alive. When I finished college in 2001, we continued 4 times a week, an hour a day, for 4 months. My father told me as much as he could, and then I leaned across the white pine dining table in our home in Massachusetts and pushed him to remember more. Did the Nazi general, Herr Krautzig, my father interrupted. Herr Krautzig, I said. Did Herr Krautzig ever disappoint you? Yes. Well, how? When the guards found anybody stealing from the slaughterhouse, they would beat them terribly. Sometimes Herr Krautzig would get in on it, and you would see that he could be very cruel. How? He'd kick them while they were on the ground. He'd hit them with the base of a rifle. Mixed here with my father's stories are my imaginings of how he moved, or sights that he saw during the occupation of Minsk. I had to imagine so as to fill gaps. This story also has become my own. For years I avoided talking about my experience of interviewing my father, getting to know him. It finally occurred to me after much prompting from readers, friends, and my mentor, Bev Lowry, that the reason I wanted to write his story was important, because he wasn't always a good father, and I wanted to figure out why. In learning that my father had come from something horrible, and accepting that horrible hadn't just left him when he reached the United States, but stayed with him and touched my family, I found a peace with the father I first knew. This story is also ours. By doing the work, he and I grew closer. We went through a process both heartbreaking and scary, and ultimately cathartic. Sometimes we have to go through the nastiest feelings and memories to get to the better stuff, and we got there. In late 2001, after I finished taping my father, we began making plans for a cruise to Belarus. He knew I was writing this book, and since I hadn't let it go in 3 years of pestering him for more interviews, he took me seriously. He wanted to help, and he wanted to go back, but died of heart failure in March 2002 before our trip. I've since gone to the lands my father grew up on and survived on. Many of them are different now, destroyed over time and war, rebuilt in old and new ways. But always the history of his world at war lingers in the survivors and the people that were left behind. It remains in their monuments, and the earth goes unchanged. I have gone as an American to where he lived as a Belarusian, a German, and a displaced person. I've gone as a writer, wanting to inform his work, and as a son and a man in search of more of his father. While I was in Moscow for the first time in 2000, on my way to the subway, I saw a teenage girl in a jean miniskirt and pink tank top buy a cold, cooked fish from a street vendor. She proceeded to bury her face in its belly, gnawing the flesh of the fish. She spit bones onto the street. Chapter 1. Dirt lodged in his socks. Dirt kicked up as the plane glided low to the ground. Volodya had stood tall in the grass just moments ago, fascinated by the plane, its distant hum slapping him from a daydream. It was a pigeon in the sky, then a hawk, and soon a dragon. Why was it flying so close that the whir of its engines rang in his ears? It had a queer black mark on its side, a cross with its tips bent over, a symbol he'd seen but couldn't name. The bullets seemed like part of a motion picture, not real life, not real danger. They dinged and bounced off nearby silver trees and kicked up the dirt that landed in his shoes, and the fabrics of his socks, swirled around his legs. He blinked his blue eyes, and this thought surprised him. Who's shooting at me? Why at me? Who is shooting at me? Turned, ran, fast, ran. Maybe others ran beside him, near him too, but he didn't look. Ran faster through the grass he'd been taking a pleasure walk in, to the cabin where another 20 campers had been playing chess, whittling with pocket knives. He dropped a chiswick as he went, dropped all thought of why or who, and only knew this: run means live, run means safe, run means inside and away from falling bullets. Inside they must be waiting for him, the campers, boys his age, other pioneers. His counselors, Alexei and Mikhail, must be looking for him. He slammed the cabin door as he entered and saw frightened faces peeking up from under low birch beds. Saw Alexei's usually droopy eyes wide open. Volodya crawled underneath and joined him, wondering why he had not come looking for him. No one had called for him. "Volodya, run!" No one screamed. No one told him to crawl under a bed. "Что это?" he asked. "What is it? What's happening?" "Fascisty," Alexei said, his chin to the ground, his eyes on the door as though at any moment death itself might march through it. The Nazis. Nazis had arrived. So, I'm going to skip a chapter, which I've never done before. So, chapter that I'm skipping is the camp counselors negotiate with the Nazis to let the Belarusians go back to the capital of Minsk. And they are allowed to go, but they can't take any of their cars or trucks. So it's a 100-mile walk, and it takes them 2 weeks that they have to do it. And then they get to Minsk, the capital, and they're standing on an overlook and see that the whole city is destroyed, 85% destroyed. And then the counselors say, go into the city and find your parents. The kids go off on their own. Before he left for camp, Volodya's mother Valentina pulled him aside. Her blonde hair fell over her shoulders, her 36-year-old face unwrinkled and pretty, the meat of her lips made beautiful with lipstick. She was secretaire in an office. Volodya had seen how workers in the office responded to her. She entered, her heels clicking along the metal floors. The quiet of the office ended, and suddenly everyone had something to do. An important call to make or paperwork that required immediate attention. They knew she had the power to report them for infractions ranging from laziness to stealing supplies. Any such action could be seen as an attempt to undermine the great efforts of Stalin, the party, her. She would not stand for it. Cross her, and she would report you. Then, who knows what might happen? Valentina looked at her son. She had 2 children with Volodya's father, Alexander, before he died of tuberculosis in 1931. Volodya and his sister Rema, who was 7 years older than he. Since then, she'd had affairs with party members, mostly the bosses at her office or other powerful men, but no one that stuck, no one she called her boyfriend. She patted Volodya on the head, rubbed her belly, and told him, when you return from camp, we might have a new brother or sister for you. With that, he left for camp, kissing his mother on the cheek. His sister would spend the summer in Minsk with their mother, disinterested in playing camp games at her age. Volodya didn't say goodbye to Rema because she was off with friends when he boarded a truck for camp. He didn't mind because he never felt particularly close to his sister, and he knew he'd see her at the end of the summer. As he walked into the smoking city, he knew his mother must be worried about him. She must have thought to come find him, but been unable to with that new baby in her belly. He played with the idea of her rounded in the middle, rubbing her hands together, staring out the window and waiting for him to come down the street, as he was now. She'd be so happy to see her boy. She would call from the 3rd-story window, Vova, and be at the front door of the apartment to meet him in 2 blinks. She'd hug him, brush her long white fingers through his blonde hair, and kiss him. She would cry. He walked past the skeletons of Belarusian apartments, the steaming remains of office buildings and grocery stores. He was lucky to have been out of the city when the air raids began. Luftwaffe planes dropped massive bombs on the homes, exploding them from the inside out. Roofs collapsed completely, and bombs started a fire inside that raged slowly at first, engulfing the building as citizens who'd once lived inside scurried out if they could, died if they couldn't. In the first day of the attack on Belarus, Germans destroyed 700 planes from the air, leaving the Belarusians with little chance of offering an air offensive. The Luftwaffe continued dropping bombs on Minsk until June 26th, cutting a wide path that destroyed 85% of the city. In the center of Minsk, they left a wide stretch of buildings untouched. As Hitler's army moved en masse through and past Minsk, it left thousands of Germans behind to occupy those buildings and to hold the city as Germany's, as the rest of the army continued eastward. Volodya hardly recognized Minsk. Only the gray and brown stones of the road felt familiar. He wondered where the people who lived in the buildings had gone. Would his mother, his sister, and he leave after he got home? He stopped when he came upon the government house near the city center. From across the street he saw men smoking cigarettes outside the building. He recognized their uniforms, decorated on the sleeves with the same slanted crosses with their tips bent backwards that he'd seen on the plane that shot at him. Fascisti. The last time he'd seen the government house was in May, before he left for camp. He and his mother went to the parade to celebrate International Labor Day to honor the workers that the Russian communist regime spoke so highly of. They stood close to the government house, which was adorned with mammoth red flags picturing the mighty Soviet leaders Stalin and Lenin. The Red Army marched in front of the house, soldiers 10 or 12 abreast extended for miles down the streets. Generals rode in on horses, dismounted, and joined city leaders on the steps of the government house. The leaders had stood taut and proud, reviewing that army, nodding stone-faced at its beauty and size. Volodya had told his mother, "They all look like giants." A band had played the Internationale. People leaned from their apartment windows near the government house and joined others on the main street and the powerful men on the steps of the government house in singing, "Arise, you workers, from your slumbers. Arise, you prisoners of want." Now shots rang out somewhere in the city. A tank's treads rolled to a stop in front of the government house. Men crawled out from inside like ants from a hole. One soldier turned in Volodya's direction, and from several hundred feet away, Volodya thought he was doomed. The soldier lit a cigarette, turned back to the others. Volodya noticed he was not the only Belarusian now. A babushka wrapped in gray tattered kerchiefs, shawl, and a brown skirt poked through the ashes of one of the nearby apartments. She was certainly more of a spectacle than he, the way she mumbled to herself as she sifted through the ashes with a long stick. The soldiers, they ignored her. They chuckled, spoke quick words, and pointed off in different directions. As he continued to walk, he saw many Belarusians rummaging. They stood on cement stairs, staring into the remains. They dirtied their hands in the ashes of home. Several cried. Some gathered on the streets and said, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" to each other. Some children chased a pigeon. The Belarusians did not speak to the Germans, and the Germans did not speak to them. Volodya's eyes grew large as he passed a soldier on the street, and his spine tensed. He wondered if the soldier would grab him, but he did not. Volodya saw his building from a block away. He walked faster. The closer he got, the more he saw his home's charred window frames and blackened exterior. The Germans had gotten to his home. His mother? The vision of her running to capture him in her arms left him. He knew as he stood in front of this home that it was empty. No one could live there. Outside it stood as it always had, only burnt. He climbed the cement stairs, pushed the front door, and peered through blackness at a place he did not know. Walls and stairways had fallen, and rubble remained. Had his mother been buried under the rubble? He choked on the smoky air. He closed the door. He noticed then the markings on the side of the building near the entrance. Dozens of mothers, fathers, anybody, had scribbled onto the brown bricks of this building, and most of the others. Volodya's eyes devoured the charcoal-drawn words. "Natasha, if you find us, we will be staying at Uncle Sergei's. Get in touch with us there. Kolya, we've gone to Uncle Sasha's in Moscow." He stood for 3 hours, blinking, straining to find his name. His stomach churned whenever he read some other name. There were so many messages, but not one for him. That's that. And now Chris Clark.
So,
Question and answers later.
Yes.
oh, sorry. Shit, I'm really bad at that.
What?
No, wait.
Okay.
Like, when is it going to be done? Like, where are you?
You can do questions and answers now.
Woman in front.
Yes. No, when do you think you're going to finish the book? And
I hope by end of September. It's about 300 pages now, and he's gone to Germany now, where they declared him German. They measured his skull, with blonde and blue eye, and gave him IQ tests, and said, "You're a German." So I have to write that section, which is probably 115 pages. Probably by end of September.
Any other question?
what?
We do this as part of the All Things Outlined.
I didn't know.
So. No, I didn't know it was going to happen either. It's the first time.
Thanks, Stacy.
I'll think of more. What made you want to write into a story?
Just
That
he was so grumpy, like, and I couldn't figure out why. Like, he was so torn apart by his childhood, and I just wanted to figure out how that came to be. So, digging in, trying to figure him out.
More
Does your
questions?
family know you're writing it?
They do.
Have you shared, like you did the last time, any of it?
Some of my family. I have a big family, as you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've shared different parts with different family members. I have a niece and nephew who are my inspiration or my pains in the butts, because they ask me constantly, like, "Have you written more? When is it going to be done?" And they ask for a deadline. That's why I say end of September now, because they're pushing me for a set date. You're on.
I'm on. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering some questions too. That's
You're welcome.
fun and awesome.
You're gonna do great, Chris. No pressure though.
No pressure. No pressure at all.
I
I
used some
know.
voices, so.
What's that?
I used some voices, so.
You did use some voices. Okay, so I am reading from Down the Cape, which is a novel that is told, it's about a young man who is on the eve of his wedding trying to piece his family back together after 10 years of internal strife, as it were. And so the story is told part in the present, part in flashback. Each section begins with something that's going on around the wedding. And so this is from about halfway through the book, and it takes place at a rather unconventional bachelor party. At least the setup does, and then the flashback takes place after that. Okay, and I think all you need to know that is mentioned here is that Michael, the main character's sister, Ashley, works as an exotic dancer. He references that, so that's all you need to know. It was only once they were alone together that Michael began to sweat. His father had left at midnight, thanking the boys for the invitation and the girls for the entertainment. Ian had left for the next room, led off by the bustier of the two performers. And Carl, once he had finished counting out the $500 bills he had agreed to leave for Ian's seductress, he stepped out into the hotel courtyard with a couple of cold ones to chat it up with the security guy, who, it turned out, was a fan. That left Michael and Natasha, who was asking him now, "Where do you want me?" Michael scanned the room, then pointed. "Over there, on the floor, against that bare wall, and you'll need," he looked around again, your stockings and shoes." She pushed herself up off the couch, then navigated her way through the maze of easels, shaking her head and chuckling to herself. "This has to be the strangest party I've ever done." Michael searched the room for a clean canvas as she pulled on the first of her stockings. "Only one should be all the way on," he said, "the right one. The pose will be you pulling on the left one." "Got it," she said. He set the last of the blank canvases on the easel he had been using all night. "Do Isis and I get to keep any of these?" she asked as she sat down. "To be honest," he said, "most of them are garbage." "Not yours," she said. "Even mine aren't all that. You're too damned modest." Michael blushed. "Okay," he said, getting back to business. "Lean back against the wall, keep your right leg flat on the floor, and lift your left leg up." She nodded, then did just as she was told. "Right," he said. "That's great. Keep your knee about at the same level as your chin, and keep your eyes focused on the stocking as you're pulling it down." "How far down?" she asked. "About mid-calf," he said. "And make sure you're using both hands to pull it down. But gently," he added quickly. "Slowly, I mean. You're not in a rush." She smiled. "You needn't be in a rush either, Mr. Silver. I can't leave until Isis is done in the other room. We've got plenty of time." "I don't know about that," he said. "This is only Ian's second time. They were probably done before she got his pants down." Natasha chuckled. "Sorry I seem so frazzled," he said. "I just want to get this one right." "You apologize too much, too," she said. "Your soon-to-be better half the cause of that?" "No," he said. "That'd probably be my sister." "Your sister the stripper?" "That's the one," he said, beginning to sketch the line of Natasha's arched back. "She's been making me feel like I have something to apologize for since the day my parents brought her home from the hospital. And she's the reason that this evening was all about easels instead of..." Michael nodded. "The guys insisted on a traditional bachelor party, but I've never been one for keeping things traditional. I mean, when your sister's in the profession, is she the reason you asked? She the reason you're so afraid of looking at me, too?" Michael stopped sketching. "What do you mean?" "You haven't looked at me all night," she said, still holding the pose, still fixing her eyes on her stocking. "Not really. At least not since I took my clothes off. The sketches you've done have been great, but they've all been from memory." She paused for a moment, then sighed. "Haven't they?" Michael nodded. "This one's Olivia de Berardinis, from an old trading card set of her best pinups. Michael set his pencil down and stared at his sneakers. Pick up the pencil, said Natasha. Isn't that the rule, that you never take your pencil up off the page? He picked it back up. How did you know? How did you know I wasn't doing it? How did you know I was doing it from memory? I saw how nervous you were when you let your buddy Carl pick a pose early on, when he set up something you'd never seen before. I don't think that pose had been seen by anyone on Earth before, said Michael. She laughed. It was a pretty hard one to hold. Finally, for the first time that evening, he smiled. Can I be honest? He asked. Absolutely, she said. Lay it on me. I did take one semester of psych before dropping out. It's all about something my sister said to me once. Or, well, something she said about me. And that was? She said that I'd never been able to say no to a pretty girl in my life. Wow, said Natasha, matter-of-factly. It's harsh. It's also true, said Michael, and it makes me worry. Looking at another girl isn't a crime, Michael. Neither is thinking about one. But acting on those thoughts, he said, spinning the canvas around for her to see. Acting on those thoughts is a crime. The worst crime, he said, isn't it? She lowered her leg and turned toward him. Have you ever done that? She asked. Do you have any real reason to be worried? Michael nodded. Kinda, he said. Yes. The beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, depending on your perspective, had begun under the proscenium arch of Kimball College's main stage. And though there was no audience there to witness the production live, those who had heard the tale told in the 3 years since spoke of what happened there with reverence. They spoke of it as if it were the most romantic story ever told. Michael was working on the last corner of a 48 by 48 foot backdrop with the tiniest brush he owned, a 9 1/28 inch red sable that he normally reserved for painting ceramics. Behind him, one lingering pair of feet shuffled and skittered across the floor, and try as he might to stop himself, he could not help but glance over his shoulder in between strokes. He could not help but stare at the girl to whom the feet belonged. Through the accident of her DNA, Jenna Worthing was possessed of the same idyllic body the Greeks had sculpted 2,000 years before. Statuesque, all hips, she was more woman than any girl he had ever known. She spun slowly in her tight black leotard, her arms reaching upward, those full womanly hips thrust outward, and her head back, her auburn hair falling downward in a matted mess, away from her sweat-soaked brow, from that soft, girl-like face of hers, that face that was, as always, devoid of any of the embellishments, the rouge, the eyeliner, the lip gloss, that might have more fully given her the facade of a grown woman. Wisps of hair clung to each of her apple cheeks, and a heavy, wet lock of it was strewn across those petite lips of hers, which curved upwards at the corners in the devilish little grin that seemed her most cherished facial expression. When she lifted a leg off the floor, you could see that her foot was dirty, blackened from dancing atop this rubber floor for most of this cold winter's day. He turned away from her once. He realized that he'd been staring at the cracks between her toes, and he wondered what he'd been looking for. Some splotch of pure, innocent pink? Who knew? Michael tapped at the bulge in his right jeans pocket where he kept his wallet, and thought of the picture of Robin that was still there, and then he painted some more. Jenna sat down beside him when she was done, legs stretched out in front of her, arms stretched backward to support herself as she stretched. She smelled deliciously awful, her scent a funky potpourri of perspiration and peppermint patties, burnt rubber and bolognese sauce. Nobody, she said, panting in between gulps from her liter of spring water, is ever going to notice this. I will, he said. I admire your dedication, she said, laying her head on his shoulder, her labored breath hot against his neck, her hair clinging to his cheek. Me too, he said. I admire your dedication, not mine. Thanks, she said. I wish it would start paying off, you know. You're too harsh on yourself. She patted him on the shoulder as she stood to go. Aren't we all? Michael watched her walk away. Her leotard was riding up in the back, her firm bottom glistening with sweat. He imagined Robin in the same situation, running around looking for a sweater to wrap around her waist, or walking backward toward the door, trying not to stumble over her own feet. Jenna paused at the stage's side door and looked back at him. "You want to walk back to the house together?" "Yeah," he said. "Yeah." The bitter December wind whipped at them as they trudged across campus through the freshly fallen snow. Originally founded when Thomas Jefferson was in office, Kimball College sat atop a wooded hill high above the city of Haverhill. Down in the city, along the banks of the Merrimack River, there had once been a thriving shoe industry. Now, like much of the city, the factories sat boarded up and crumbling. But up here on the hill, behind the brick and iron fence that surrounded the whole of the campus, there remained a happy, hippie community of bohemians and ne'er-do-wells. In the midst of a quiet residential neighborhood, the campus's sprawling lawns served as something of a public park, where children rode their bikes and families walked their dogs, and where, from September to May, the student body was like the circus come to town, a rainbow of world cultures, of hair colors, and of sexual deviancies in this place that had been, for almost a century, nothing more than a coven for rich men's daughters. The front of the campus presented to bustling South Main Street and to the rest of the world beyond it the facade of academia, a trio of harmonious buildings built in the classical style, all Doric columns and red brick, each of them flanking the sacred sod of the front lawn, which tradition said you were not allowed to set foot upon until your commencement. But the rest of the campus, beginning with the modern-looking library, all windows and gray concrete, stood in stark contrast. It was the many faces of Kimball that Michael loved, however. There was so much history yet here, and yet so much of the here and now. They had crossed half of the campus before his mind wandered back to the girl at his side. Jenna was so bundled up that only a sliver of her face was visible, just between where her purple wool hat ended and her thick green scarf began. Her enormous winter coat added so much bulk to her frame that she resembled more a middle linebacker than a prima ballerina. He smirked behind his own scarf. She would have beaten him silly had he made that comparison out loud. She was not, she told people early and often when discussions of her dancing came up, a ballerina. She danced modern, and though she'd never say it out loud, her eyes would always add, "And please don't make that mistake again." She didn't have the body of a ballerina, she was quick to point out. Her shoulders were too broad, her bust too big, her hips far too wide. Her legs were long enough, sure, but her neck was too short, and her technique, well, that was a whole other story. Her turnout had always been poor, her flexibility was mediocre at best, she couldn't do point at all, and she had the worst feet in the entire company. Once, when they'd been sitting around on the living room floor of their townhouse, she'd caught Michael flexing his foot and simply marveled at his form, his arches, the way his first 3 toes were almost all the same length. "I'd kill for your feet," she'd said. But he'd always taken her criticisms of her body the same way others seemed to take his criticisms of his paintings. They were both too close to their art to have any kind of perspective on it. Her body, in his humble opinion, was quite all right. She was what Grampy would have called a substantial woman. Not nearly as substantial as Granny, but a healthy young lady, a compliment Grampy could never have paid to Robin. As they passed over the footbridge, Michael cast a sideways glance over the railing, down at the icy pond. He remembered the first time he brought Robin up here to show her around, to maybe convince her to come up to school up here instead of down in Boston, at Berkeley. She'd be the star of the program up here, he'd tried to convince her, instead of just another face in the crowd. She'd smiled in that way she always did, like his mother did whenever his father said something stupid, a sort of yes dear smirk that was meant to end the conversation. But he, like Albert, his father, was never good at picking up on that particular brand of smile, at least not until reflecting on it later. And he'd asked her as they'd walked over this same bridge, "Berkeley doesn't have a pond in the middle of campus now, does it?" And she'd nodded along, saying, "No, I guess not. But Berkeley is where she went anyway." He hadn't said anything after that, but he'd wanted to. And what he would have said, what he'd said to her in his head, planning the conversation that he would have with her if the opportunity ever presented itself again, was, "Look around you, listen, breathe. There's no clutter here, no buildings all hunched together with no room to breathe. There's no exhaust filling your lungs, just fresh air. There's no honking, No swearing at the guy in front of you because he's not moving fast enough. If you want to move fast, there's plenty of room to go around. I'm peaceful here. I can hear myself think. I know who I am here. How can you love me and not love this place? Has she fessed up yet? Jenna asked him, her voice muffled by her scarf. They passed underneath the glow of the floodlights that hung alongside Tupelo West as Michael searched for an answer to her question. I suppose she would she? Jenna added. Maybe the runt didn't see what he thinks he saw. He and my cousin don't exactly have a happy marriage. I don't think he'd have even bothered to call you if he wasn't sure. The patch of his scarf right in front of his mouth was wet with saliva, and it chafed against his lips as he said, I suppose. The cluster of townhouses loomed in front of them now, huddled around their snowy common law like so many vagrants around a flaming garbage can, unapologetically too close for comfort. Their house, the last one on the right, was dark. Their housemates must have been saving their energy for tomorrow night's opening party, for that was the way that the rest of them, as non-artists, found a way to share in the whole event. Michael scowled behind his scarf, recalling Robin's laughter upon first sight of these delightfully derelict buildings, and how they stuck out, even back here on the weirder, non-traditional side of campus. Yes, they were too angular, too 70s in their design. And yes, they were gradually sinking into the mucky New England soil, but they were charming nevertheless. And oh, how he hated Robin that night. He'd taken her back to the car, driven her home, and promised himself he would never bring her back. But the memories haunted him still, enveloped him in their irksome embrace. In fact, they so enveloped him that he didn't notice the snowball careening toward his head that evening until it was too late. It hit the side of his head with a splat, the wet and cold seeping right through his hat and into his ear. Jenna was running down the path in front of him, laughing hysterically. He reached down into a towering bank and hurled a clump of snow at her, taking no time to ball it up. But she was out of range, already at their doorstep with a key in her hand. What do you think I should do? He asked her as they sat at the dining room table, sipping from mugs of steaming hot chocolate, their coats and scarves, and hats draped over the other chairs. I've told you, she said, picking at the dried paint that covered his hands and forearms, piling up the flakes on the table in a neat stack. You should dump her so that you and I can get it, finally get it over with. Michael winced as she plucked a huge chunk from his wrist, a clump of hair coming along with it. Sorry, she said, frowning for a moment before going back to work. What about your boyfriend? He asked her. She sighed, rubbing the edge of her thumbnail along a particularly stubborn piece of paint. Michael ran his free hand along the top of his head, trying to smooth out the hair he could feel sprouting outward in a dozen different directions. He chuckled. I love how you put it. We need to get it over with. She kicked him lightly underneath the table. I'm not the only one who thinks so, she said. He grabbed hold of her foot before she could steal it back. When he began to knead at the naked arch with his thumb, she let go of the hand she'd been holding and leaned back in her chair, unclenching. She moaned, that is so nice. Michael shook his head and groaned. Damn. You think too much, she said, flexing her foot in his hand as he stopped rubbing. You know what, he said, I do think too much, but never about the important things, at least not until lately. Now I can't stop thinking about all the stupid stuff she's put me through. Like her going and cheating on you, Jenna said, pulling her foot back from him, now that he wasn't doing anything with it. Like her going and cheating on me, Michael said, nodding. Jenna leaned over the table and smiled. Listen, could you maybe drop her for tonight? And then, pausing for a moment, she added, or, maybe for the rest of your life. He picked up his hot chocolate and sipped from it, a little bit bothered by the fact that his sipping had begun to sound a lot like his father's slurping. She was high school, and now it's college. I went through the same thing. She held her mug up to her lips and tilted her head back, then set it down on the table, a frown on her face. She'd begun to rub a foot under the cuff of his jeans along his calf. We've wasted too much of our time here, she said, picking up her mug and tipping it upside down. Everyone in this house came to college with a significant other, but they all came to their senses a long time ago. Now it's time for us to see the lights. You mean the light singular, right? Whatever, she said, reaching across the table for his mug, then sipping from it. Michael laughed. I just can't believe that a girl like you, a girl so talented, so beautiful. Oh, stop it, she said, handing him back his mug, her foot disappearing from his leg. You're taking me out of the mood. You're the only girl I know who gets turned off by compliments about her appearance. It's not that, she said. It's just that I get annoyed when you don't give yourself enough credit. You do it with me, you do it with your art. She paused, seeming to consider whether she should really say what she wanted to say next, and then said, you do it with everything. Point taken, he said. And I guess baseball teams do carry a personal masseuse, so even though I wouldn't be on a team in your league, so to speak, I could conceivably be an employee of the league. She chuckled at him. You need to learn when to shut up. It's genetic. Jenna stood and gathered up her things. I'm going upstairs, she said. Kate is gone for the night, so she paused and smiled. Good night. Good night, he said, waving a little wave. Michael watched her ascend the stairs as she rounded the corner to her room, then looked down the flight of stairs that led to his own bedroom. He tapped at his wallet again, and then pulled it out. He leafed through the photos he kept inside, past Matt and Ashley, past Vern and the baby, past the miniature copy of the poem Footprints that his mother had bought for him after Grampy's funeral. The last picture was of Michael and Robin, from senior year, up on stage at the talent show, singing into the same microphone. He remembered how perfect they'd sounded, how in tune they'd been as they sang in harmony. You can go your own way. He ran his fingers along the edges of her face, then closed his wallet and put it away. Jenna took her time in answering his knock, opening the door slowly. She was wearing a longish t-shirt that fell down to her hips. Are you sure? She asked him, because I don't want to force you. I'm sure, he said. She opened the door wider, took him by the hand, and pulled him in.
Oh yeah, wait, the wave.
What happened next?
What happened next?
Huh. That's there's a child in the room. This is the PG version.
Right. Yeah. There's earlier versions of that chapter. Don't get into what happens next. It all cuts away. It's like in the Truman Show, they talk about that. How the camera moves away whenever they're about to have sex. It's just, and that's what happens in my book generally, with the exception of one time with his sister. It's told from the perspective of the four cousins. He and his sister and their two cousins. And with the exception of the one time that his sister is involved in a kind of violent act, it always cuts away. So there's only so much you get out of actually describing the sex scene, unless you were writing particular